It was one of those calm, quiet afternoons out in the country, the kind where time seems to stretch a little longer and the breeze carries a sense of peace. Joe, a humble farmer, was in the middle of his daily chores, just going about his usual routine, when the sound of frustration broke the stillness. A woman, clearly distressed, stood beside her broken-down car near the edge of the dirt road, not too far from Joe's barn. He didn't know it yet, but this simple act of stepping outside to help would lead to something extraordinary. Because when she walked into his barn, well, let's just say everything changed. Hey there, and welcome back to Tales Unveiled. Get ready for a story that proves one small act of kindness can rewrite the course of your life. Joe was 42 years old. He lived just outside the city limits, surrounded by wide open land and the sounds of nature. With him on the farm were his wife Alice and their 2 daughters. Joe had been raised by farmers. He was the only child of hard-working parents who never had much, but gave all they could. From the time he could walk, Joe loved the farm. Horses were his favorite. He'd follow his dad around, learning how to fix old machinery, milk cows, patch up fences, and keep the land running. Money was always tight, but his parents made sure Joe had what he needed, especially when it came to school. Since the school bus didn't run near their home, Joe's father would drive him miles every single day, no matter the weather. When Joe graduated high school, his parents encouraged him, well, more like insisted, that he go to college. They wanted something different for their son, something more stable. Their dream was for him to become a businessman. So, to make them proud, Joe packed up his boots and headed off to earn a degree in business management. And you know what? He actually landed a decent job right after college. He wore suits, went to meetings, even had his own desk with a nameplate and everything. But after 5 years of pushing paper and living a life that felt borrowed, Joe reached his breaking point. The city lights didn't feel like home. The fluorescent office lights didn't compare to sunshine on a cornfield. So, one day, Joe made a decision that terrified him. He quit. He thought his parents would be disappointed, maybe even angry. But to his surprise, they weren't. They were proud. Deep down, they had always known the farm was where his heart belonged. Joe returned to the land he loved. He took over the farm and slowly made it his own. Sadly, not long after, his father passed away, and just 3 years later, Joe lost his mother too. The farm that once echoed with his parents' voices became quiet. But Joe wasn't alone. Around that time, he married Alice, his college sweetheart, and together, they began to build their own legacy. Over the years, Joe and Alice grew their family and expanded the farm. They raised their 2 daughters with the same values Joe's parents had passed on to him. Work hard, be honest, help others. The couple faced their fair share of financial struggles, especially with the growing number of animals and the constant upkeep that came with farm life. But they pushed forward one chore at a time. And that brings us back to that quiet afternoon. Joe was in the barn, gently milking one of the cows, a chore he always enjoyed, when he heard something that didn't belong. A voice shouting in frustration. He wiped his hands, stepped outside, and followed the sound. There, just off the road, was a woman in her early 30s. Her car's hood was up, and she looked like she was about to cry. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Joe called out, walking over. She spun around, clearly frazzled. "Does it look like everything's all right?" She snapped, then immediately winced. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I'm just having one of those days. And now my car decides to give out in the middle of nowhere." Joe gave a small smile. "It's okay, really. We all have days like that." The woman looked around, then asked, "Do you live nearby?" "Right there," Joe said, pointing to the barn and the farmhouse beyond it. "That's our place. My family and I run the farm." She nodded slowly. "Well, it's beautiful. Mind if I take a look at your car?" Joe asked. She laughed, a bit skeptical. "A farmer who knows about cars?" "More than you'd think." Joe grinned. "Let me try. Be my guest." Joe leaned over the engine, poking and prodding like someone who'd spent plenty of time fixing all kinds of machines, because he had. After a few minutes, he stepped back. "Try it now." The woman turned the key, and like magic, the engine roared to life. "Oh my God, you fixed it," she cried. "I'm sorry I doubted you." "Thank you, seriously." "No worries," Joe smiled, glad to help. "I'm Celine," she said, reaching out a hand. "Joe." "Well, Joe, you're my hero today. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." "You're welcome, Celine. I bet you're thirsty after all that stress. Want to come in for a drink?" She hesitated for a second. "Actually, yeah, that sounds great. I've never been on a real farm. Mind showing me around?" "Of course. Come on. My wife and I would love to give you the tour." As they walked back toward the farmhouse, Joe felt a strange sense of peace. Something about Celine's presence felt right. When they stepped inside, Alice greeted them from the kitchen. "Oh, hello there." Alice beamed. "Nice to meet you, Celine. You came at the perfect time. Lunch is ready." "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly," Celine replied quickly. But at that exact moment, her stomach let out a loud growl. Joe chuckled. "Please, we insist." "Well, okay, since you asked nicely." They all sat at the wooden dining table, sunlight spilling to the windows as they shared a simple, hearty meal: fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and warm stew from a night before. Celine chatted with Alice like they'd known each other for years. And that, believe it or not, is where things really began to change. After lunch, with full bellies and lighter hearts, the trio stepped out into the afternoon sun. Joe led the way, proudly pointing out various parts of the property as they strolled to the wide fields and weathered barns. Celine was wide-eyed, clearly fascinated. "You guys really live out here year-round?" she asked, ducking under a wooden beam as they entered one of the older barns. "Every day," Joe replied. "It's not always easy, but there's a peace here you can't buy in the city." Alice chimed in, brushing hay off her jeans. "And every day's different. There's always something to fix, feed, mend, or worry about." Celine nodded. "Honestly, it sounds exhausting, but kind of beautiful too." Joe walked over to one of the horses, gently patting its neck. "This here is Frederick," he said with a smile. "He's been with us for years." "You name your animals?" Celine asked, amused. "Of course," Joe laughed. "They're part of the family. You'd be surprised how much personality a cow can have once you've known her a while." "Can I touch him?" she asked, pointing toward Frederick. "Go ahead," Alice said warmly. "He's gentle." Celine reached out slowly, unsure, but Frederick nudged her hand with his nose. She giggled. "Wow, he's sweet." They continued walking, the barn creaking softly with each step. Celine occasionally scribbled something into a little notebook. She kept pulling out of her coat pocket. Joe noticed but didn't think much of it. People like to journal, after all. Maybe she was a blogger or just someone who liked to document unusual days. And this was definitely one of those. After a while, they ended up back near the main house. Joe was wiping his hands on a rag when Celine suddenly turned to both of them. "Joe, Alice," she said, a little more serious now. "I've been thinking, I want you to have something." She pulled a check from her pocket and held it out to them. Joe blinked. "Wait, what's this?" "It's a thank you," Celine replied simply. "A parting gift. You didn't have to help me, or invite me in, or show me around your home. But you did." Joe took the check and looked at it. And when he saw the number written there, his heart skipped a beat. This is too much," he stammered. "We can't accept this. It's too generous." Celine shook her head. "Please, let me do this. You said yourself you've been struggling. Use it to fix the things that need fixing. Buy new equipment. Whatever you need. This farm is beautiful, and so are the people running it. You helped me when you didn't even know my name. Let me return the kindness." Alice, standing beside Joe, was just as stunned. "We're honored, but this is a lot of money." "Exactly," Celine said. "And it's going to the right people. Don't say no, okay? Please. It would mean the world to me to know it's helping you." Joe looked at Alice. She looked back. There was a long pause. Then Joe folded the check carefully, his hand still shaking, and gave Celine a hug. Alice joined in, wrapping her arms around them both. "Thank you," Joe whispered. You have no idea what this means. I think I do, Celine said gently. And thank you both for being kind when the world usually isn't. Not long after, Celine glanced at her watch. I've got to hit the road. It's a long drive back to town. But I hope this isn't the last time I see you. We'd love to have you visit again, Alice said. Anytime. Joe walked her to the edge of the driveway, watching as she got into her now-functioning car. As she drove off, they stood side by side, watching the dust trail behind her disappear into the horizon. She was something else, Alice murmured. Joe nodded. Feels like we met an angel today. And as they turned back toward the farmhouse, neither of them could hold back the tears anymore. They embraced again, overwhelmed not just by the money, but by the grace of it all, the unexpected generosity, the feeling of being seen. This feels like a dream, Alice whispered. Joe looked out over the fields, the wind brushing through the golden grass. No, honey, this is our new reality. With that money, we can finally breathe. And breathe they did. In the weeks that followed, everything began to shift for the better. The check Celine had given them wasn't just a gesture. It was a lifeline. Joe wasted no time putting it to use. They started by replacing the old, wheezing farm truck that had been coughing smoke for months. Then came new tools, proper veterinary care for the animals, even a greenhouse to grow vegetables year-round. Alice was finally able to cut back on her second job, spending more time with their daughters and joining Joe on the farm during the day. They even renovated the guest room, just in case someone ever found themselves stranded again. But more than the physical changes, something else had taken root, a sense of hope, of stability. For the first time in years, they weren't just surviving, they were planning, dreaming. And Joe, he walked a little taller. He smiled more. He still woke up before dawn and worked until dusk, but now there was lightness in his step. He no longer felt like the world was closing in around him. All this from one moment of kindness. It's strange how life works sometimes. How one choice, one instinct to help a stranger, can lead to something you never expected. Joe hadn't asked for anything. He just did what felt right. And in return, life gave back more than he could have imagined. Months passed. The farm, once weathered and worn, began to shine again. Joe and Alice didn't become rich overnight, but for the first time in years, they weren't scraping by. They were steady, secure, and most importantly, grateful. Joe often found himself thinking about Celine. He wondered where she was, what she did for a living, what had brought her down that road on that particular day. He and Alice had tried to look her up, Googling her name, checking Facebook, but it was as if she'd vanished into thin air. No last name, no return address, nothing. She didn't even tell us where she worked. Alice mentioned one night, as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the cornfields. She didn't have to, Joe said. She already gave us more than we could have asked for. There was something almost sacred about the whole thing, how Celine had appeared out of nowhere, received help, and then given back so much more than anyone would expect. It wasn't just the money, it was the message behind it. That kindness still mattered, that sometimes, even in the most ordinary places, something extraordinary could happen. Their daughters, too, seemed changed by the experience. They were young, but they'd seen the struggle firsthand. They knew how hard their parents worked. And now, they were learning what it meant to give, to receive, and to live with open hearts. Joe started to keep a small journal by his bedside. He wasn't the type to write before, but something about that day had unlocked a new part of him. He began jotting down his thoughts about the farm, about faith, about life's unpredictable turns. And always, Celine's name found its way into those pages. He even started volunteering in town more, helping out at the local food pantry, fixing fences for neighbors who couldn't afford repairs, offering rides to the elderly. People began to notice. They started calling him that farmer with the big heart. But Joe never did any of it for praise. He did it because he'd seen firsthand what a little help could mean. And deep down, he hoped that maybe, just maybe, he could be someone else's Celine someday. One morning, as Joe was refilling the animal feeders, a familiar sound reached his ears, the rumble of a car coming down the gravel road. He looked up, and for a split second his heart leapt. But it wasn't her, just a mail carrier waving from the driver's seat. Still, the feeling stayed with him, that odd mix of longing and peace. Alice walked up behind him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Joe said, taking one of the mugs. "Just thinking about her again." Alice smiled. "Me too. You know, sometimes I wonder if we were meant to meet her. Like, maybe it wasn't just chance." Joe nodded. "I've thought about that a lot. I mean, what are the odds? A car breaks down in the middle of nowhere, right by our place? I don't know, it's like she was sent." Alice leaned against the fence beside him. "Well, whether she was sent by fate, God, or just bad luck and a busted radiator, she changed our lives." Joe sipped his coffee and looked out across the pasture. The animals were moving slowly in the golden morning light. Life was calm, stable, and yet buzzing just beneath the surface was a memory of that afternoon. Then came the idea. Joe sat down at the kitchen table later that night with his journal in hand. "I think I want to start something," he told Alice. "Start what?" "I don't know yet. A project. Something where people can give back to strangers. Where kindness is a point, not the reward." Alice looked intrigued. "Like a community group?" "Maybe. Or maybe just a place where people can share stories like ours. Remind folks that good still exists." Alice reached across the table and took his hand. "I think that's beautiful." And so, the Ripple Project was born. It started as a simple Facebook page, nothing fancy. Joe posted their story, changing names to keep things private, and invited others to share their own tales of unexpected kindness. Within weeks, hundreds of people had joined. Some were there to read, some to write, others to just quietly witness something hopeful in their scrolling. Messages poured in, stories from people who'd been helped at gas stations, who'd found envelopes of money taped to their doors during hard times, who'd had strangers cover their groceries without a word. Joe read every single one. He replied to as many as he could. And each time he saw someone write, "I thought I was alone," or "Your story gave me hope," he felt that same flutter he'd felt the day Celine handed him the check. Not about the money, about the connection. One day, a letter arrived in their mailbox, no return address. Inside was a note written in looping script. "Dear Joe and Alice, you may not remember me, but I'll never forget you. Thank you for reminding me that there's still good in the world. With love, Celine." Joe read it 3 times before passing it to Alice. Her eyes welled up. "She's out there," Alice whispered, "and she knows." He tucked the note into the back of his journal, where he kept the most important things. As the Ripple Project grew, Joe and Alice didn't change who they were. They still rose before sunrise. They still got their hands dirty. But they also made room for stories, for strangers, for the small chance that something beautiful might be waiting just around the corner. Because once you've experienced kindness like that, you don't just pay it back. You pass it on. The months rolled into years, and what began as a simple Facebook page turned into something bigger than Joe or Alice had ever imagined. The Ripple Project wasn't just about stories anymore. It had evolved into a movement. People from all across the country, even from overseas, were writing in to say how a stranger's story helped them get through a tough time, or how it inspired them to do something kind themselves. Small towns were hosting Ripple Days, encouraging acts of kindness. Teachers were using stories from the project in classrooms. Local businesses partnered with Joe to create kindness hubs, places where people could leave or take what they needed: warm clothes, non-perishable food, a handwritten note of encouragement. And through it all, Joe stayed grounded. He was still the same man who woke up before dawn, who repaired his own fences, and who could coax a tractor back to life with little more than a wrench and determination. But now, something had changed. He wasn't just farming land. He was cultivating hope. And the beauty of it? It all came from one small decision: to help someone who looked like they needed a hand. Joe never stopped working on the farm, but he did begin traveling a bit more, sometimes speaking at community events, churches, and small town fairs. He never took payment. He just shared a story. The story of how someone who expected nothing in return ended up receiving more than he ever thought possible. One evening, After speaking at a charity dinner in a nearby town, a teenager approached Joe with tears in her eyes. "My dad left a few months ago," she said, her voice trembling. "My mom's been doing everything she can. She's exhausted. But one night, I read your story online, and I don't know, it gave me this weird feeling, like maybe things had turned around." Joe was quiet for a moment, then reached into his bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter he always kept on him, just in case he met someone who needed it. It was a letter he'd written to his younger self, back when things felt like they might never get better. He handed it to her. "This helped me. Maybe it'll help you too." The girl hugged him tightly. "Thank you." Joe watched her walk back to her table. And in that moment, he realized something. The gift Celine had given him didn't stop at the check. It was still unfolding, still echoing, rippling out into lives he'd never touched directly, but affecting them just the same. Back on the farm, things were thriving. They had more animals, better equipment, and a sturdier roof over their heads. Alice started a small side business, selling homemade soaps and jams. The girls were doing well in school. And whenever someone in the area ran into trouble, Joe and Alice were always among the first to show up and offer help. Quietly, humbly, and without expecting anything in return. One day, a local news crew stopped by to do a short feature on the farm and the Ripple Project. Joe was hesitant at first. He didn't want to turn their life into a spectacle. But after some thought, he agreed. "If it helps one more person," he told Alice, "then maybe it's worth it." The piece aired a week later. It was short, just 5 minutes, but it captured something raw and honest. Footage of Joe walking through the pasture, Alice waving from the porch, their daughters helping to bottle honey in the shed, a voiceover telling their story of kindness, giving, and the unexpected reward that changed everything. After the segment aired, letters and emails flooded in. Some people shared their own stories of helping strangers. Others asked how they could start something similar in their towns. But one email stood out among the rest. It was short, simple, and signed. "I saw the piece. You're still the same. I knew you would be. Thank you for everything. S." Joe sat at the kitchen table for a long time that night, just staring at that email. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. Somehow, he knew she'd feel his gratitude without words. The seasons shifted, as they always do. Winter brought snow that blanketed the fields, and Joe used that time to write more, reflect more, and spend evenings by the fire with his family. Spring returned with new life, calves, baby chicks, blossoms on fruit trees, and with it came fresh purpose. At some point, Joe stopped asking why it had all happened. He no longer questioned the odds or searched for the logic behind the encounter with Celine. Instead, he embraced the mystery of it. Sometimes, good things don't come with explanations. Sometimes they just arrive, and you either accept the blessing or let it pass by. And Joe, he chose to accept it, to live it, to multiply it. One afternoon, while Joe was checking the irrigation system in the lower field, a young man on a bike stopped by the gate. "Hey, sir," he called out. "Sorry to bother you. I'm trying to get to the next town, and my phone's dead. Any chance you've got a charger or a map or something?" Joe looked at him for a moment. Dusty shoes, tired eyes, that same worn-out look he'd seen on Celine's face years ago. He smiled. "Come on in. We've got both." The young man looked surprised. "Really? Sure. And you look like you could use a glass of lemonade." As they walked toward the house, the boy asked, "Do you always help strangers like this?" Joe chuckled. "Let's just say, I learn from the best. Because sometimes the people we help never come back. Sometimes they don't say thank you. But every now and then, someone like Celine walks into your life and reminds you that kindness isn't wasted. It's planted. And over time, it grows quietly, powerfully, into something far bigger than you ever expected." The boy stayed for a while, long enough to charge his phone, drink a couple of glasses of lemonade, and chat with Joe and Alice at the kitchen table. His name was Marcus, a college student traveling between cities for a photography project. His car had broken down 2 towns over, and with limited money and no working GPS, he'd started biking, hoping to make it to a bus stop before dark. Joe listened, nodding slowly. The story felt familiar. "You know," Joe said after a moment, "you picked a strange road to travel." Marcus laughed. "I figured as much when my phone died, and the only sign I saw for miles said, 'Livestock Crossing.'" Alice set a plate of cookies in front of him. "Well, you're lucky. Joe here has a bit of a reputation for rescuing lost souls." Joe shot her a playful look, then turned back to Marcus. "You're welcome to stay the night, if you need to. We've got a guest room, and it's been a while since we had a visitor." Marcus was taken aback. "Seriously? I couldn't impose." "Nonsense," Alice said. "We've got fresh linens and a warm meal. That's not an imposition. That's hospitality." And so Marcus stayed. That evening, as they sat on the porch, stars blinking into view one by one, Marcus shared his dreams of becoming a photojournalist, of telling stories that matter, of traveling the world. Joe shared his too, quiet ones, rooted in soil and sun, about keeping the Ripple Project alive and growing. "I've always believed that stories can change people," Marcus said, "sometimes more than facts or figures." Joe nodded. "They changed us." Before sunrise, Marcus packed his things and thanked them both. He promised to pay the kindness forward. And as he rode away down the dusty path, Joe stood there watching, heartful. Later that morning, Joe opened his journal and wrote, "One small kindness leads to another. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it flows forward. Either way, it's never wasted." The following year, Joe and Alice were invited to a national storytelling conference in Denver. The organizers had come across the Ripple Project and wanted Joe to speak during the closing session. He hesitated at first. It was exactly in his comfort zone, but Alice convinced him. "Your voice is honest," she said. "People need that." So, Joe stood on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers, holding nothing but a small note card and the truth. He didn't rehearse much. He just told the story. The day Celine showed up, the car, the barn, the check. The moment their lives took a turn they hadn't expected. The journey of how a single act of kindness turned into 1,000 ripples across the country. And at the end, he said something that stuck with everyone in the room. You don't need a lot to change someone's life. Just a moment, a decision, a bit of compassion. Kindness isn't about getting something in return. It's about planting something you may never see grow. But plant it anyway, because the world needs more seeds of hope. The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. Not because Joe was flashy or eloquent, but because he was real, genuine, the kind of person people still believed in. After his talk, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She held his hand tightly and whispered, "Thank you. I needed to hear that today more than you know." Joe simply nodded, as he always did, humbled by what his story had become. Years passed. The daughters grew up and went off to college, though they always came home for harvest. The farm changed with the times. Solar panels, better irrigation, a new barn painted white with red trim. Joe and Alice got older slower, but never tired of the life they'd built. And the kindness? It kept flowing. One winter morning, Joe received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo, an image of Frederick, their old horse, taken in the soft glow of sunset. Beneath it was a note. Thought he looked majestic in this light. Thank you for letting me meet him. M. Joe smiled. He placed the photo in a small wooden frame and set it on the mantel above the fireplace, beside the photo of Celine's check. Never cashed, just preserved as a reminder. The money had been transferred digitally long ago, but that piece of paper still meant something. Not because of its value, but because of the story it carried. He often thought of Celine. They never saw her again in person. But in many ways, she never left. She was in the barn beams, the dinner table, the guest room, and every person who knocked on their door in need of help. And she was especially in the Ripple Project, which continued to grow beyond anything Joe had imagined. It became a nonprofit, with chapters across states, volunteers, outreach programs, and a storytelling platform now hosted on its own sleek website. But even with all that, the heart of it remained the same. One person, one act, one moment of kindness. In the final years of their lives, Joe and Alice were honored in their town with a bench at the local park, under a maple tree, not far from the playground. The inscription was simple: to those who planted seeds of kindness and let them grow. Visitors often sat there in silence, not knowing the full story behind the names etched into wood, but feeling something warm in the gesture. And sometimes, just sometimes, a traveler passing through town would stop, sit on that bench, and pull out a journal. Maybe they'd write about someone who helped them. Maybe they'd remember a kind stranger. Or maybe, like Joe once did, they'd start something small and meaningful, just because it felt right. So, what do we take from this story? It's not about grand gestures. It's about showing up, listening, offering help when it's least expected. Joe's life didn't change because he was looking for reward. It changed because he led with heart. And in return, that heart echoed out into the world, touching people he never met. When you plant kindness in the soil of ordinary life, you never know what might bloom, but you plant it anyway. And that's what the Ripple Project was always about, not waiting for a miracle, but being the start of one. Love this story? Tap that like button and subscribe to Tales Unveiled for more inspiring stories like this one. And if you want to start your own ripple, share this video with someone who's changed your life, or better yet, be the reason someone else believes in goodness again. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.